On August 23, 2013, in a Russian neighborhood, 8-year-old Maria was sitting at her kitchen table drawing a horse. Maria's parents had taken her to a farm not long ago where she got to ride a pony. Ever since then, she was very interested in horses and ponies. While Maria was busy drawing, her dad, Mikhail, who was 42 years old, was in the kitchen chopping onions for dinner. Chopping those onions made his eyes water, and he thought of having a little fun. So he turned to Maria and pretended to cry because of the onions and was rubbing his hands on his eyes, making funny faces. Maria thought it was funny and burst into laughter with her dad. As he kept chopping the onions, he realized he needed an important ingredient for the meal. Feeling a bit frustrated, he raised his hands in the air and called out to his wife, who was in another part of the house, to ask if they had any potatoes. Maria's mother replied from somewhere in the house that they did have some potatoes, but they were down in the cellar and they were very old. After finishing chopping the onions and tossing them into a hot pan, Mikhail left the kitchen. He playfully poked Maria as he passed by her, making her giggle. He walked through the living room, past Maria's grandmother and brother, and headed for the door at the beginning of the hallway. This door led to the cellar. Maria stopped her drawing and watched as her dad opened the cellar door and began walking down the steps. He closed the door behind him, and Maria went back to coloring her horse. After a few minutes, Maria noticed the bad smell. She looked up to see the onions on the burner starting to burn, and smoke was rising to the ceiling. Suddenly, the smoke alarm started blaring loudly. In all the chaos, Maria's grandmother hurried into the kitchen, trying to fan away the smoke in a hurry. She turned off the burner, moved the burnt onions, and tried to clear the air. Maria's mother, hearing the commotion, rushed into the kitchen. When she saw the situation, she exclaimed in frustration, "Mikhail, you've burned the onions! Get up here and help fix this." But Mikhail was still down in the cellar, and Maria's mom, annoyed by his delay, grumbled to herself and left the kitchen. She walked to the cellar door, opened it, and went downstairs, closing the door behind her. In the kitchen, Maria's grandmother was trying to save what she could from the burnt onions. Maria had gone back to her horse drawing. However, after about 5 minutes, she started to feel worried. Her parents had been in the cellar for what felt like too long, and she couldn't shake the feeling that they should have come back by now. So she stopped her drawing and stared down the hallway at the cellar door. At the same time, Maria's grandmother had also stopped checking the onions and walked over to stand by Maria. Both of them waited by the cellar door, expecting to see their parents coming up any moment. As seconds turned into minutes, they began to worry because no one had come out of the cellar. Finally, Maria's grandmother decided to take action. She said, "All right, I'm going to find out what's happening down there." Maria watched as her grandmother walked through the living room past her brother, who was busy playing a video game. Maria's grandmother reached the closed cellar door and called out, "Hey, are you guys okay down there?" But there was no response from the cellar. She turned to Maria's brother and asked him to turn off his video game because it was too loud. She thought maybe their parents were trying to call from the cellar, but they couldn't be heard over the game. A bit frustrated, Maria's brother paused his game. Then Maria's grandmother called out once more, "Hey, are you guys okay down there?" But once again, there was only silence. Maria's brother got up and said, "Why don't we just go downstairs and make sure they are okay? What are we waiting for?" Without waiting for his grandmother's response, he walked to the cellar door, opened it, looked down, and said, "Look, they are right there." He began walking down the cellar steps, calling out to his parents, "Hey, when's dinner? What's happening?" As he went down, He closed the cellar door behind him. Maria's grandmother returned to the kitchen, sitting with Maria, and they kept their eyes on the cellar door, thinking their family would return any moment. But as time passed, there was no sign of their parents or brother. Both Maria and her grandmother were getting more and more worried, feeling that something was not right. Maria's grandmother decided to take action again. She picked up her phone and called a neighbor saying, "Can you come over? I think something's wrong, but I don't know what it is." After the phone call, Maria's grandmother didn't wait for the neighbor to arrive. Instead, she went to the cellar door, opened it, and walked down the stairs. This time, she left the door open so Maria could hear her grandmother's footsteps as she descended. Then, there was a sudden thud, and everything went silent. Maria was now really scared, and the neighbor hadn't shown up yet. Terrified to call out her family, Maria decided to go down the stairs herself. It was pitch dark below, and she couldn't see anything. She moved carefully. 10 minutes later, the neighbor Maria's grandmother had called finally arrived at their house. The neighbor knocked on the front door, but no one answered. He tried the doorknob, found it unlocked, and went inside. The house was eerily quiet, and there was no one on the first floor. However, he heard crying, and it seemed to be coming from the open cellar door. He hurried down the cellar stairs and was shocked by what he saw. There was 8-year-old Maria crying on the floor and her whole family lying around her, confused and scared. The neighbor quickly picked up Maria, rushed upstairs and out of the house, screaming for help. When help arrived, they searched the house and went down into the cellar. What they found was truly heartbreaking. Maria's whole family, including her grandmother, her brother, and her parents, were all found lifeless. The cause of their death was the very potatoes that Mikhail had gone downstairs to get. Maria's mother had been right when she warned Mikhail about the old and rotten potatoes in the cellar. As these potatoes rotted, they released harmful fumes that couldn't escape the closed cellar, which had no windows. The family had the habit of closing the cellar door each time they went in. Over time, the dangerous fumes filled the entire space, and one by one, as family members went into the cellar and shut the door behind them, they lost consciousness due to the toxic fumes and tragically didn't make it out. Maria was the only one who survived because her grandmother, who had gone down just before her, had left the door open, and by the time she went in, many of the dangerous fumes had dissipated, making it less harmful for Maria when she went into the cellar.